I'm sorry for that delay. I think it's working now. Yeah, that should be on. Okay. It's called Easter Island because some white guy found it on Easter Sunday, but it had a name before that. It was called Rapa Nui. And you can decide which name is appropriate for you. I'll probably use them interchangeably. The people of that island are also called the Rapa Nui, like Hawaiians in Hawaii. There it is. It's as far as you can get from another permanent human habitation. 2,360 miles from Chile. It is the remotest year-round occupied place. Yeah?
Is there reception there?
Good question. I don't know. Yeah?
Are we supposed to be writing notes?
I don't care. I try not to test you too much on... I don't plan to test you on this as far as I'm concerned. I haven't even started the class yet. I'm still talking about like the general environmental science, greater universe. Then again, dude, I gotta warn you, the College Board is notorious for asking what you might consider trivia questions. I mean, if you're just gonna sit there anyway, you might as well. I can promise you that I don't plan to ask a direct exam question about this because I don't consider this part of our class yet. Your call. And Easter Island was colonized by these badasses who I'm totally obsessed with. The general term for this greater group of people is the Polynesians. I don't know if you know this, but they traveled across the open oceans on dugout canoes using no modern navigational technology. So they followed celestial navigation, like constellations and stuff. They used their knowledge of wind patterns, migratory fish and migratory birds, and probably a bunch of other stuff that's over my head. It's believed that they might have spent as much as 3 months at a time rowing in open blue water without a support team. They would lay down their sails to capture rainwater during the frequent storms. They would sleep by leaning back on the other dude's lap behind them. Maximum discomfort. They would take some food, but at some point their food would run out and they'd have to make a decision like, hey, we're past the halfway mark. Do you want to keep going? They would free gaff large fish, and they would hand line fish as their food supply while traveling. They had to wear those wacky helmets to protect themselves from the sun because they otherwise would just be out in the sun for a full tropical summer. It's the equator, so it's 12 hours a day every day. That's a lot. I think these are the rowdiest humans ever. I think I'm pretty tough, but I'm not that tough. Matter of fact, they're so rad that efforts to figure out where Polynesians originally came from are hotly debated among Asian people because everybody claims their descendancy. So I've heard Japanese people say that they came from Japan, and I've heard Chinese people say they came from China, and I've heard Koreans say that they came from Korea, and I've heard Filipinos say that they came from the Philippines, and probably other people from other places. But as far as I can tell, that hasn't been settled, at least not very conclusively yet. We know they expanded in 3 waves. the near Polynesian islands, the greater Polynesian islands, and the final third wave, those 3 arrows for Hawaii, Rapa Nui, and New Zealand. That's some hard water to travel out there. I spent a lot of time in the ocean, and the bravado and resolve of this is just so humbling. I get scared so easy out there, and I've spent a lot of time in the water. Can't even imagine. Anyway, sometime like 1,000, 1,500 years ago, they pulled up on this little tiny island that's about 2/3 the size of Santa Cruz Island. 2/3 the size of this one right out here, the big one. When they pulled up, they saw right away that it was windy, dry, hot, pretty hostile. Very, very limited supplies of fresh water on this island. But it had really good fishing. Because it's so windy, there's always upwelling on the leeward side of the island. You know, wherever it's offshore, the water's getting pushed away from the coast, so it has to be replaced by deep cold water, and cold water holds more nutrients, so there's a lot of seafood there. So at any given time, as long as it's windy, you can fish off one side of this island, and there's hella fish, and Polynesians really like fish. And they found something else really special on this island, but I can't show you a picture of that. Anybody know what special thing they found on this island? Yeah.
Wasn't there those like statues?
No, they didn't find any statues on this island.
Oh, didn't they?
They later on made statues,
Made
but
statues.
they were excited to stay because they found
Was it the trees?
they found these really big trees, giant palm trees.
Why can't you show us a picture?
Because they all got cut down. There's no more. It was a unique species on that island. It was called the Easter Island giant palm. We only know of its existence by fossilized seeds and mud prints of its leaves. But we believe that it was much larger than any other modern palm tree. There's a category of giant palms. Chile now has the world's largest giant palm. Probably the ancestral species to Easter Island. And there are other giant palms in the old world as well. This is a farm of palm trees, I think in Senegal. I can't remember, I Googled giant palm tree and I saw this. And apparently these are babies. You can see the homies walking in front there. These are little tiny baby trees. So I can imagine the Polynesians who fish from dugout canoes were pretty excited about big old trees. You'll understand that, right? So as far as we can tell, they stayed, and as far as we can tell, they cut down every last tree eventually. And by the way, I'll take a little side trip to say that's kind of the end of the simplest story. The simplest story is, if you cut down all the trees, you get, anybody know the word for this when all the soil washes away?
Erosion.
Erosion, yeah, you get rampant erosion. And so in the fossil record, you can tell that there used to be topsoil and trees and topsoil and trees, then you can see that there was no more trees and there was no more topsoil. Volcanic soils are pretty thin. When there's no more trees to anchor them, it's in the tropics, so when it rains hard. All the rain comes down at once in these big, heavy storms that are really short, and all that dirt just washes away because the anchor is gone and goes all the way out to the ocean. And so with the loss of topsoil, the Easter Islanders basically starved. They didn't have any more trees, and they couldn't find any more surface food. Okay, that's the short story. But I want to get back to the more interesting stuff. It has a lot to do with these, and what did they mean, and why did they do it, and why do we care? How many of you have seen these before? These are the Moi of Easter Island. They're really famous. You might have heard there was some kind of mystery about how they were moved. You might have heard some people tell the story that silly Easter Islanders shot themselves in the foot by wasting all their trees to move these things. That might be right. Today there's 887 of these. They were all carved in a really short period of time. There was like a heyday of carving on the island. We know that they are all clustered in coastal villages. You can imagine where that sandy spot was. That was a coastal village where they could drag their boats out on the sand and then hang in that cove to the left. And you can see that all of the Moi are faced away from the ocean, looking at the people. They represent the chief of a village's ancestors. There's a blend of religion, government / governance, culture, and by the way, machismo here. If I'm the chief and I can keep all my village stoked, then it's your job to either bring me some seafood or bring me some fruit or some roots or whatever, or carve my statues to my mom and my dad and my grandpa and my grandma and my other grandpa and my uncle and my other uncle and then my great-grandpa, because my ancestors are responsible for my greatness. We build them totems of recognition, and we give them a place for the spirit to live and look over me in my leadership of you, the villagers. You can see there's a blend of religion, the ancestral worship, the macho, like showing I'm the best chief because I've got the most ancestors. You can tell I'm the best chief because look at how many people I could keep happy. Look how many statues they were able to make. So these are like monuments to the greatness of each chief. You can tell a lot by looking at a fossil record. We know that there was no humans on the island, no humans on the island, no humans on the island, just a couple humans on the island, just a couple humans on the island, just a couple humans on the island. And all of a sudden, there was a lot of humans on the island. We can tell that they were happy and healthy. There are very, very, very few small bones, or bones of small human. Anybody know what that tells you?
No babies died.
No babies died. That's right. Easter Island had a lower infant mortality than many parts of the United States in 2018, y'all. So they must have been doing something right, because they could keep all the babies alive. And if you do the numbers, you can see that population grew very rapidly. Like people were having 8, 10, 12 babies in a lifetime, and it seems pretty clear that almost all of those were surviving. Big families, rapid growth. By the way, big humans. Like stout bones. Long, long bones. Polynesians are pretty big. You ever heard of Samoans? Samoa is a Polynesian island. No cavities, very few deformities. Evidence of a really good diet. Fish hooks like this. I don't know if y'all fish, but that's a big ass hook. Like you can go catch like 300-pound tuna on like a little 6/0 hook like this. They have like free gaffs for just like picking up fish off the surface that are like stout handles, like 6 feet long. Like if you're in a little canoe where you're sitting at sea level, that can only be meaningful for a very, very, very big fish. Tuna bones don't really preserve very well. Just the ear bone. The otolith. But otolith analysis shows that they were eating giants of the sea, like big fish. They were also eating tons and tons of dolphins. Our Chumash ate hella dolphins too, actually. That wasn't a problem back then, because they were burning fossil fuels, man. And you could just tell that stuff was good. Like, they grew pigs on the island and like ate fruit, like tropical fruits. Like, I will totally sign up right now for a lifetime of sushi with bacon and fruit, making lots of babies. 100% down for that. I'll go to that island right now. I can pay for my ticket in cash. Ready to leave right now. I am so into that. Right? Like, it sounds sweet? I want some of that. Wherever they were carved, they were moved to these small villages around the coast. That held 20,000 people. And to keep that many people happy and healthy and well fed on an island 64 square miles, I mean, you can daydream all you want, but with basic subsistence food production without modern technology, that is as good as humans get. That this was the Garden of Eden. Like, holy mackerel. This is it. Yeah.
How many people still live there today?
A couple hundred. Yeah.
Do you have to have like a certain pass to live there, or like
A certain pass? I don't know about passes.
like
It's part of Chile now, so you have to work that out with the government of Chile.
oh. You know how there's like reservations and stuff?
Yeah, it's a national park of Chile, but they have people who live there permanently.
Oh.
And there are still Rapa Nui today. There's a few descendants of this period that still survive. But very few. If I'm not mistaken, the mayor of the island is himself. His last name is Rapu. They were carved laying down. Lava rock is really heavy. Fun little side trip in this story. How the heck did they move those statues? And for a long time, this was considered a mystery. But of course, the Rapa Nui all know how they moved the statues. We just didn't believe them. So our archaeologists, anthropologists would interview Rapa Nui, and the Rapa Nui would say, "Oh yeah, they would walk." And then, of course, you know, I would probably make this mistake. Most of our Eurocentric interpretations of this are, no, you silly little primitive. I'm not looking for your religion. I mean, practically speaking, how did the humans move the statues? And the Rapa Nui are, no, I understand, bro, they walked. And everybody's like, they didn't walk, they're statues. Silly. And so the most common explanation was the most obvious, like Greeks and Egyptians moved their big pyramid blocks. We assumed that the Rapa Nui cut down the palm trees to make rollers. But apparently that doesn't work, because rocks are really dense and it's very difficult to distribute the weight in a way that won't crush palm trees, which are very weak. Like, palm trees are really good at like resisting bending, and they don't break in hurricanes. You've all seen that, right? Like hurricane in Florida or whatever, the palm trees go like this. But if you lay one of those things down and you put something heavy across it, it just goes it's like fiber. So this was like a famous assignment for a class at MIT. And some engineering student was like, well, if all you had is the statue with the sticks and some rope, you could do it like this. Tell that guy's an engineer because look at those hands. They have never broken rocks. But it's like walking a fridge. Y'all know how you move a fridge? You walk it. You know, you like walk it along in one corner and then you like tip it up a little bit, you move it on that other corner, and you like put it on that corner and then you know what I'm talking about? You all seen how a fridge moves? Well, that works. They really did walk them. Anyway, we can laugh about Europeans another time. I keep thinking about how nice this all sounds, and the fossil record shows that things were about as good as they get for humans. It was just like glory days and glory days and glory days and glory days. Figured out food supply, rapid population growth. They had a few people in charge whose leadership led to the development of culture, religion, iconography, sculpture. Making the statues was the #1 social activity. And this is what people did during the day. Dang, that sounds nice. Eat sushi and make babies and go carve some statues. I'm so ready. Sign me up. But things change really fast. There's like layers and layers and layers of good old times, and then one really thin layer that tells the story you need to hear. We know the trees were gone because all of a sudden there's no more seeds of the tree, no more prints of, no more evidence, no more fossil evidence of the stuff, and all the layers above have no more of the tree either. We also know that that was a bummer, because you can tell that coastal trees used to prevent salt spray from the windy coast. But all of a sudden, at that layer where there's no more trees above, there's also extreme salinization of the soil, meaning salt spray from the waves, instead of being blocked by palm trees, covered the island and built up in the soil, and salt water's tough to grow plants in. So we can see that farming collapsed. We can also see that the soil washed away, because there was rich soils, rich soils, rich soils, rich soils, rich soils, and then right on top of that layer it gets really thin and sandy. You know, without the erosion problem, without the roots to anchor topsoil, the water accelerates and carries away. You know, when flooding looks muddy on TV, you see like a flood in Hawaii or whatever, it's all mud. Like that used to be somebody else's topsoil. We also see a rise in carbon content of the soil, meaning that wildfires became more destructive because the wind was stronger. That makes sense. You all know that wind can drive fires. We see no more fishing tools, no more dolphin bones, no more otolith. They stopped eating seafood. I mean, they stopped eating fish. Because, you know, the canoes rot really fast. Palm trees, they go rotten in like 10, 12 years. It's just paper. So they stopped eating seafood. Without being able to grow much on land, they stopped eating tropical fruit. They stopped eating the pigs. You can see that they got desperate. There's evidence of desperation. You start seeing more and more and more little tiny human bones. You start seeing more and more cavities, evidence of broken bones, stunted growth, fractures. A couple ways to interpret the fractures. you see that they started to eat the pelicans and the seagulls and like the crabs and the clams, and like they were eating little tiny shells, sucking out the food from like little tiny shells. And you see a lot of human bones with injuries from sharp things. You'll understand what that means, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Does that mean they're cannibals? They were
Oh,
cannibals?
well, so far it just means that they're violent.
Oh, I thought that meant they were cannibals.
That's coming later.
Oh, okay.
Here's the part that totally drives me nuts. It seems clear that things got really bad during a drought that we now understand is probably caused by El Nino, because El Ninos make a drought on this part of the ocean. You know, when you have an El Nino, some parts get more rain, some parts get less rain. This part of the world during El Ninos gets really dry. And it's probably safe to assume that they had really just maxed out food production. And you know, environmental conditions changed, things got bad. And I find like the most shocking thing, that if you're going to remember one thing about today, it should be this. Then came the peak of statue building. Think about it. Everybody's all hungry and desperate. Like, what's the chief going to do? Be like, all right, guys, I guess we suck as a village. We quit? Hell no. He's going to be like, you haven't built me enough statues. We need more ancestors so we can go take their food. And there's this really clear correlation. The layers on a small island are uniform. You know, there's just like a layer and then a layer and then a layer. There's a layer that shows no more trees, erosion, salinization, wildfires becoming more destructive. No more pigs, no more fruit, no more big seafood, scrambling for food, making a bunch of statues, stabbing each other a lot. That's all there. And there's only one layer left. The one layer on top of that, people broke all the statues and stopped making new ones. They said, well, F you, you suck as a chief. Your grandma and your grandpa suck after all. They tipped over all the statues, they broke their faces. Most of the Moi have their noses broken off, many cases their lips or their eyebrows or their eyeballs gouged out of the statue. It was like breaking the statue. And then there's one layer with all the long bones scraped. After which, almost no human bones. Why would you scrape long bones? In the language of Rapa Nui, like the worst insult, like the one thing that you never say, translates in English as, your mother's flesh sticks to my teeth. Like, there's still Rapa Nui today, and obviously cannibalism is still a really powerful idea.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in a period of warfare, if I'm just going to call you out and like drop the gauntlet and say the worst thing I can say, it's like, yo, I ate your mom. I mean, even now that's pretty harsh. Somewhere around 90-95% of the island died in a blink of an eye. The statue building areas were abandoned. You can go today and see where somebody walked away. They were like, yeah, let's make the statue for his grandma. And they're like, you know what? What if this is all a scam? And they're like all over the island. There's all these carving sites that were abandoned. There isn't actually one in the ocean. This was a movie set. I used to tell the wrong story. I found out I was lying. When that Dutch guy came on Easter Sunday in 1722 or whatever, he looked on the island and said, "Nah, we're good." They just kept going. He named it but didn't actually land there. He didn't put a Dutch flag on it. He was like, "Man, we don't want this one." He saw humans there. He saw no trees. He was like, "I think we'll be all right. Let's pass." 50 years later, Captain Cook came by, and in his journal he says, "The Easter Islanders that we contacted are small, lean, timid, and miserable." Didn't stop him from taking a bunch of slaves that he sold in Peruvian guano mines. But within like 100 years, the population of the island was down to like 100. A few years later, they begged Chile to take them. So, "Can we please be Chile? Can we please be Chile?" And Chile's like, "All right, whatever, tourism." And there's still a few descendants. But I want to look at that pattern. I don't want to just look at that one thing about the trees and the erosion. That's not wrong, it's just not interesting enough. Here's what I want to look at. Watch the pattern. Agricultural development, population growth. Consolidation of power, rise of culture, religion, iconography. Environmental change, drought or flood or hot or cold. Inaction or inappropriate action by people in leadership. Kind of double down on what you're already doing. Just try harder at what you've been doing. And warfare, cannibalism, collapse. If we take those 5 steps from Easter Island, you want to know a crazy thing? You can look on the map, and any society you can name in the history of humans pretty much followed those 5 steps. Like if they're gone, that's what happened. Like, I don't want to exaggerate, but like probably the most successful American native nation. You might have heard of Pueblo, Anasazi, cliff dwellings. I don't even know how many gazillions of people in one of the harshest environments in North America figured out that you can farm riverbanks at the bottom of canyons because the periodic floods deliver moisture and nutrient supply down to those canyons. Kind of cracked the code of growing food in the American Southwest, where all the wagon trains died and there was all the tragedy for the westward expansion and stuff. Native Americans here were like thriving to the point where they would build these little agricultural outlands and then trade with a center of government at the center of the empire that consolidated power, ran elections, provided military protection against raiding parties, stored the food so at a bad time they could kind of help you out. And it became this huge like United States of Anasazi, whatever. In this case, it was a period of drought. Couldn't grow enough food to pay their dues to the center. Tried to break away. Instead of saying, okay, good luck, the center of the Anasazi Empire started fighting among itself to keep everybody in line and make sure they were still paying their dues. Tried to double down. People destroyed each other's sculptures. They civil war. They ate each other. Mayans, one of the most advanced nations in the history of humanity, had like complex astronomy and could predict eclipses like 10,000 years out, and had brain surgery. Like if you fell and got hurt and had a swollen brain, they'd give you anesthetic and they would open up your skull cap and drain the fluid, and then they'd put back your skull and fix it. Like way back in the day, like they pretty much had it on lock. The tropics is a really tough place to grow food, so they figured out how to like terrace mountainsides. And same thing, you know, like a distributed society, agriculture on the edges, ship food to the centers of power. Centers of power have cultural practice, a lot of religiosity. They had like organized sporting tournaments. People would travel on paved roads between all these. During a period of changed environmental conditions, in this case a lot of rainfall, they weren't able to grow the food, couldn't pay their dues, starts to fragment. Mayan Empire ended in civil war, then outfighting. They ate each other, they broke each other's statues. If you go to like Tikal in Guatemala, all the statues are defaced, all their noses are broken off and their eyes are gouged out. The people lose faith in their leadership when the leadership can't feed them anymore. Fun fact about the Mayans, they had a lot of survivors too, who gave up on Mayan culture and went back to hunting and gathering. We know because abandoned Maya sites have been revisited by hunter-gatherers who would use the old temples as like shelter from the rain and a place to slaughter monkeys and make a fire and then go back to the forest. How gnarly is that? To have a society that voluntarily gives up on itself. All the white people think that they're immune, but no. Everybody know how the Vikings figured out the food supply so they could have rapid population growth?
Killing everything.
Yeah, they killed everything. They figured out how to make these really fast ships, and they got all these like yoked, strong, well-fed soldiers to row them even faster than the wind could blow them. And they would lead these warring raids to coastal villages and be like, oh look, they're growing food, let's rape and slaughter them and then take all that stuff for us. Fun fact, a little side trip. Do you all know how the Vikings got their soldiers to be so vicious?
Drugs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does anybody know which drugs?
I don't know.
A psychedelic mushroom called the berserker mushroom, Amanita muscaria. It gives you extreme elation, like PCP, like you get all like amped up, and then you have out-of-body experiences. So they get all the soldiers together and they get them all high as F, and then they're all like flying above their bodies, watching all the stabbing and the raping and the pillaging. And then they like wake up on the boat and they're like, oh my god, I gotta wash all this blood off before I see my kids. And then they all like go home and they're like normal. Yep. There's a lot of creative solutions to feed people. It worked for the Vikings, their population exploded, step number one. Step number two, they built a consolidation of power. They had the rise of culture, religion, ritualized practice. Right when food production was maxed out, they had this gigantic empire all over Europe, the fastest population growth of any culture in the history of Europe. They had a bunch of babies and everything looked good. And then the environment changed. In their case, it was a period of global cooling, I believe. A little blip in temperatures that affected the wind, so they couldn't travel as far. Something to do with the wind. And the people in power were like, I guess we'll just keep raping and pillaging and stealing food, right? Like that's what we're good at. And so they went for it, but they couldn't get as far. So it was a whole bunch of people trying to rape and pillage a very small area, and it doesn't leave you enough food to go around. So everybody's like, I'm still hungry. So they start stabbing each other, and then they flipped out, and they basically dissolved their leadership and ate each other. number 4 is the one that really scares me. I want to talk about those 5 steps, and you don't have to take notes on this, but those 5 steps I think are important to remember, just for life. This is just like bro advice. Intensify food production that leads to rapid population growth. We've done that already. The United States is growing food in all the places that we can grow food, and we really can't grow much more food on our dirt. We have pretty much turned up American food production to 11, and that's about as much food as we're going to get. Okay. Rapid population growth, yeah, we've had that. Number 2, consolidation of power. The rise of culture, religion permeates public life, iconography. We've had that too. As a matter of fact, the history of the United States is the world's best example of consolidation of power. You have the least people controlling the most wealth in the history of money. We have never had more consolidated power than we do today here. So number 3 is next, environmental change. I wonder if we're experiencing environmental change. I wonder if some people want to keep doing what we've been doing. I feel like if we did that, the only step left is 5. And I don't want somebody to dig up my kids' bones. You all know the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome? You know, the whole point of history is not do the same stupid thing twice. I get this horrible sinking feeling when I think about Easter Island. Like, wow, times were so good. And then the environment changed and they just doubled down on their old ideas and then they ate each other. And like, we live at the greatest time to be a human in the greatest country to be a human, and most of you don't look to me like you're dying or suffering or starving, so I guess we're all good, right? We're winning. But I just think, what if, when we get to step number 4, you know, like, what are we going to do?
I'm gonna eat you.
I start getting super nervous. Super nervous. That's the end. You know, I just wanted to talk about